All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the International Mentoring Center webinar series, where we continue to pursue our mission to empower mentors and mentees worldwide by fostering a community of learning, growth, and professional development. Here at IMC, we believe that mentorship is one of the most powerful tools for professional and personal transformation. And through this platform, industry experts and leaders can share their insights, knowledge, and best practices to elevate global awareness on mentoring standards. My name is Ira, and I will be your host. So just a few housekeeping reminders for people who are new in this series. We do kindly remind people to turn on your microphones, mute your microphones, but turn on your videos if you prefer. And feel free to share any questions, thoughts, or experiences that may have, resonated with you throughout this whole presentation. So at the end of it, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation for our audiences to share their insights, experiences, questions for our speaker. So our aim is to create a vibrant community of learning and growth. So please know that this is a safe and welcoming space to ask and learn from each other. Our speaker for today is a visionary in the mindfulness field. He blends decades of contemplative practice to advancing the science and application of mindfulness. He teaches various mindfulness and burnout courses online, and he is the host of the podcast Present Moment, Mindfulness Practice and Science, and the new video podcast Mindfulness Voyage. His work inspires transformation, empowering individuals and communities to cultivate resilience, purpose, and a deeper connection to life. Please let us all welcome our guest speaker, Ted Meissner.
Thanks so much, Ira. And hi, everyone. Good to see you. Glad you could join us today. And I see some familiar names in the attendees list. So thank you so much, those of you who have followed my work before. I am so glad to have you here. And for those of you who had mentioned chat was off, chat is now enabled. So with that, let me share my screen and we'll get on with our topic for today, which is around how mentoring is supported by mindfulness and how mindfulness does that. So there's a lot here, and I want to mention to you that you don't need to take notes because the PDF version of this slide deck will be shared with you after our session today. So don't worry about taking any notes, just allow yourself the opportunity to tune in and just listen and absorb our conversation today. And this is interactive. I do want to hear from you in chat. So we have a few different learning objectives. There are going to be 3 sections to our presentation today. First is just understanding a little bit more about mindfulness and the competencies that grows, how it can help with mentoring, whether you are a mentor, mentee, whatever that relationship is like. Mindfulness can help with that. And then in our third part, we'll also be sharing some tools. And of course, because I'm a mindfulness guy, we're also going to sneak in a little bit of practice time as well. So if you've never tried mindfulness and you'd like to, today's an opportunity to put your toe in the water and see what that's like. Now, mindfulness does impact a lot of different capabilities that you as a human being already have within you. But this is exercising them. And I often use that simile of mindfulness and exercise. It takes some practice, it takes some dedication, and based on what you put into it, you will see and notice and experience changes for yourself. And again, we'll have some tools that you can use that come, some of them from my mindfulness training and also from other areas in corporate and organizational development. So we'll be looking at that as well. But I do really mean it when I say I want to hear from you with a couple of starter questions. First thing I'd like you to do is think of a time when you were really listened to. The other person didn't interrupt or try to fix you, they just listened. And what was that experience like? And if you're willing to put that in chat, just a word or two about what is it like for you to be listened to. Put that in. I'd like to hear from you about that, and I'll keep an eye on chat and see what sorts of things are coming up for you. So put that in and share your experience with others here. And then once you've done that, I want you to think of perhaps a different situation. What does it feel like when you have not been listened to? And what is that experience like? Is there a difference? Is that exactly the same thing when you're listened to or when you're not? These can be very, very different experiences for us. Or maybe for you, you find that they're the same kind of thing. Your experience is unique to you. So what is that? And you see some shares coming in. My feelings feel validated. Whoops, move a little farther forward there. Hang on, here we go. Validated when I was listened to. And when I'm listened to, it means for me that someone is caring. Yeah, there's an emotional component to that as well. It's not just I was listened to and off to the next bit of busyness. There's an influence on how you are. Belonging, another, oh, that's a wonderful world, that has that sense of connection, and not just connection, but welcome. Valued, when I was listening to, yeah, it has a sense of you matter. Felt like I was dissolving into the soul of another person when I was listened to. That's a beautiful way to put it. And nice to see you. Glad you could make it today. Safe space. We're going to talk more about that today. Wonderful insight. I felt seen. Yeah, because you matter when you do this. Okay, another question. I want you to think of someone that you admire as a mentor, or perhaps a mentor that you aspire to be, or that you are yourself. What is it about them, or perhaps about you, that you found helpful? This may have been a teacher in school once upon a time, or a family member, or a friend. What were some things about that person that you admired that make them a really good mentor for you? So when you're ready, you can put that in chat and we will come back to that in a little bit. But let's talk now about what some of the components of mindfulness are. What do we mean by mindfulness? One thing I do want to say is that mindfulness has been formally researched for over 40 years. There are, at this point, over 12,000 studies since 1980. There were some studies before that as well. And just note, this only goes up through 2023. The new version that my friend David Black puts out at the goamra.org site. We look forward to this chart every year. There's a new one coming out that will include the 2024 numbers. I'll be very curious to see what this trajectory is, because last year was the first time it dipped a little bit since 2005. And I'm curious, will it go on the rise, or is it hitting that hype cycle and it's now on a downtrend? I do want to say that doesn't mean mindfulness is on a downtrend. It's about the research around it. That Gartner hype cycle of a spike and then it normalizes is not just about one thing. It's not about the total wideness of the field of mindfulness. It's just about the research around it. But what do we mean by mindfulness? There are a lot of different definitions of what mindfulness is. It means different things to different people. So for purposes of this talk, and usually when I'm teaching, not always, but usually when I'm teaching, the ballpark. This comes from John Kabat-Zinn, who developed the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, or MBSR course that you may have heard of. Much of the research is based on MBSR. It has these components of paying attention to what's going on right now, non-judgmentally. But it's more than just that. There are a few different aspects to it. Intention, attention, and attitude. In research around mindfulness, this is known as the IAA model. And there are three different important aspects to it. And again, there are different ways of looking at mindfulness, but here means there's intentionality. You're making a choice. You're not on automatic pilot. It's not like when you're really eating something that's a little snack that you don't pay attention to and suddenly it's all gone. You know what you're doing. You're making a choice about it. And you're experiencing what is there right now. What is this experience like for me in this moment right now? And then that word non-judgmentally about mindfulness has really kind of gotten stuck as the one attitude to have with mindfulness. But in fact, there are many different attitudes that may get a little bit more of a highlight, a little bit more of an invitation based on the circumstances in that moment. So sometimes it's a matter of really inviting some trust or patience more than just that non-judgmental part to it. And one of the shares in here, and thank you for putting that in, is on what made someone a good mentor is a professor in college and felt like a friend too, always tried to understand me. That's what a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is about, is how do we understand? How do we do that? And what are things that are supportive of it? Now, this is a little bit of a scrape from the MBI-TAC, Mindfulness-Based Intervention Teacher Assessment Criteria. Within mindfulness, it's not just about chilling out and sitting in isolation and silence. There are different capabilities and different capacities as a human being that you have that grow with mindfulness. These are specifically around when you're teaching. And what is that like? And there's a lot of overlap between what you see here on screen, these different domains, and then on the right-hand side, I just put on an overview of just one of those, the second domain, relational skills. But each one of those key features in there, from the document this is from, may have several pages describing it, and specific practices we do to develop them. And takes years of training and development ongoing throughout our lifetimes to build these, because they're not finished. And like exercise, you need to use that capacity to grow it, to be flexible, strong, resilient in each of these. And a lot of overlap with the core competencies within mentoring. The IMC, the International Mentoring Center that is hosting today's session, has articulated those very well. So I did a little bit of a comparison between mentoring competencies and those we may find in mindfulness. And remember, with the IMC, there are 9 different territories to look at. These bullet items in here, it's not all of them, it is many of them from the site, and you can look that up yourself. I do recommend going to the IMC site. But each one of these that I've chosen has a very specific corollary within mindfulness. So for example, with continuous learning and development, continuous work on our skills as teachers, as just meditators, even if we are not teachers, is something we continue to do. There is continuing education in a wide field of mindfulness that is undergoing a great deal of specificity and diversification right now. There's also maintaining credentials. There are different institutions and organizations that have credentialing to recognize one's capabilities within mindfulness. Ethical mentoring practices, confidentiality and privacy is foundational, whether you're a mentor, whether you're a teacher, teaching in a classroom, or whether you are doing it in one-on-one. And these ethics and things around safeguarding too are specific trainings that we have within mindfulness to help maintain those boundaries to ensure participant safety and well-being. I just posted on LinkedIn, many of you saw, a short video I put together about considerations before taking a more robust course like MBSR. The most important thing is your well-being. That's what all of this is meant to support here in mentoring as well, and communication. We'll be talking about communication a little bit more in today's presentation, but here are a few things, particularly the building trust, managing emotions, suspend judgments, empathy. These are also parts that we find very strongly within mindfulness. Here too, in relationship building, creating a safe and trusting space. Again, this is from the IMC site. In courses, as a group, we build that safe and trusting space together. It's one of the first things we do in class 1 is together. We build and identify what helps us to share and be present. That's also part of what we find in mentoring. Here again, that empathy and interpersonal skills and vulnerability when necessary. We'll talk a little bit more about the value of vulnerability in a little bit. But we co-create this, of course, that next section. It's something we build together. and that helps influence a group dynamic in a course. And then designing the learning strategy that is unique for the individual, and certainly we do that in mentoring. I'm mentoring several different people right now, and what they are being mentored in is vastly different. In one, it's more traditional forms of meditation. In another, it's secular mindfulness programs and what might be most helpful for them. For another, it's mentoring within the corporate world. And what is that like as they start a new business? And our final three from the IMC is this commitment to enabling learning and growth, these check-ins. Integrating the learning into our daily lives is certainly why we might take a mindfulness course. And then feedback. That research that I showed you is based on pre and post instruments to see how are you doing before this intervention, how are you doing after, and what were the controls that show mindfulness was the thing that made a difference rather than just being in a group and having a supportive environment. And what are the needs? In this last section aligns with stakeholder needs because again, that is unique to each person who's engaging with the practice. And knowing what you're talking about. It's very important. Again, I post every week on LinkedIn that there is a very significant difference between grabbing a random app and listening to a random 5-minute recording of a meditation and having an engagement with a teacher, with someone who knows this territory well. I sometimes use the simile that if you were not feeling well and you heard medication was good for not feeling well, you wouldn't go to the pharmacist and just start taking random pills off the shelf. But that's what people do with their meditation practice every day when they're using something without any guidance. It's important for you to make sure that you are doing the thing that is most likely to help you with what you're encountering, and not just taking random pills off the shelf or random meditations off of an app. One of the most important things about why we do a contemplative practice, things like mindfulness, is how we move from reactivity to responsiveness. It starts by just noticing what is here right now and what is that experience like? How are you influenced by your internal weather pattern as well as the conditions around you? But it's not just noticing. If it's just noticing, that can quickly be a little checkbox and then it goes away. The next step is acknowledging, and truly, deeply acknowledging. Again, not just checking the box, but investigating and exploring what is this, whatever the experience happens to be. And then based on that deeper understanding, that deeper feeling of what is here right now, being able to have choices about how we might then respond instead of just reacting. Maybe in chat, say yes if you have ever had the experience of saying something you didn't really mean or later regretted in the heat of the moment. In fact, I'm going to put a yes in that for myself because I have done that as a human being. That is something that has happened. And maybe you have been someone who's been on the receiving end of that. And I say yes, yes, definitely, and lots of yeses coming in. Of course, as human beings, that happens. Mindfulness helps counter that. And oh, yes, with a smiley face on it too. Yeah, that is a very common human experience to have that. And that's reactivity instead of responsiveness. Great. And thanks everyone for sharing about that. I know that can be kind of challenging too. So with our last part of this first section, I want to do a little bit of a guided practice. And before we start, I want you to take a look at this picture. I didn't just put this in because it's an adorable little dog, although I am prone to do that. That's not why I have this in here. I want you to take a look at this little four-footed friend and notice, what are you getting as a sense about that being? Take a look at the eyes. There is focus here. There's intention and experiencing, and it's not what often happens in meditation, an interest in calm and getting kind of sleepy, or a heaviness and a weight added on to a seriousness, a gravity with it. No, there's a lightness that can also be part of just checking in and noticing how you're doing. So if you want to give it a try, that is a practice we'll do for just a couple minutes and see what it's like. So let's begin by taking our meditation seat. And what I mean by that is a couple different ways. Physically, if you're on a chair, although I know many people have standing desks, you can do this while you're standing or lying down as well. There's no particular magic about being seated. If you are in a chair, maybe if it's comfortable for you to scooch forward a little bit, maybe be on the edge of your seat if you can. Maybe holding yourself upright. But if you do need to use the backrest, again, your well-being is the most important. Use the backrest, that's fine. Your body, your experience is unique. Pay attention to that and take care of yourself. And you can have your eyes open or closed. You don't have to close your eyes. You can have them open. And perhaps that's something to explore a little bit. What is it like for you? Are you comfortable enough to allow the eyes to close? Or would you prefer, is it more supportive for you to have them open just a little bit? And checking in is just noticing what's here right now for you. Noticing and acknowledging. So let's pay attention to our 5 senses. Just lightly paying attention to what do you hear in this moment? What different sounds have been here all along that you might not have noticed and acknowledged before this moment? So just tune into the soundscape. Listen. Noticing what seeing is like as well. Even if your eyes are closed, you can pay attention to the experience of seeing. Is it all dark, or is it a little more dynamic than that? Again, that's unique to you. Maybe your sense of touch, the surface of your skin, noticing contact with clothing or the chair or the bottoms of your feet on the floor. Just tuning into the surface of your skin for a moment. What is there? What do you notice in your body in this moment? Maybe a sense of temperature too. Is it chilly or warm or neither of those? It's just that middle ground. Bring your sense of touch within the body. Are there sensations existing inside? Maybe little aches, itches. Perhaps noticing some movements as you take in air and let it go moment by moment. Just feel that. Feel that. There's also a sense of smell, taste, maybe some residual flavors. It's morning for me, so coffee is here. What is it for you? If anything, you don't have to notice a scent or a flavor. You can pay attention to it and explore. And also noticing what is the state of mind and heart. Gentle curiosity. This is just a check-in. It's not an interrogation, a light check-in. How are you doing? How do you feel? And when the moment feels right for you, if you'd like to open your eyes, if you've had them closed, and maybe even move the body a little bit, stretch in some way that might feel good to you. If you haven't stretched recently, that can be a very interesting experience. I'd like to hear from you. Put in chat if you're willing to share. Again, no one has to share. You can if you want to. How are you feeling right now? What are you noticing, or what stood out for you? Maybe there was a sound, maybe an internal feeling of, well, whatever that was for you. If you're willing to put that in chat, just a word or two about how are you doing right now after that brief check-in practice. I'd like to hear from you. So put that in chat. We'll keep that open. And let's move into our part 2. How can mindfulness really help with mentoring relationships and outcomes? What is that like? And I see some shares coming in. That stretch was really needed. I needed that myself. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And I don't know, sometimes stretching can be a really pleasant experience, sometimes a little not so pleasant. Sometimes it's just stretching for stretching's sake. So, question is on screen. What continues to be some of the challenges that you run into with mentoring relationships, whether you are the person providing or receiving mentoring? What's that like? I see other shares coming in about the check-in. It was a peaceful experience. And maybe a follow-up on this is just to wonder for yourself, you don't need to share anything, is how would that influence the rest of your day to have a bit more of that instead of whatever else might be showing up? Or perhaps your day is peaceful throughout. So what's that like? I noticed I feel thirsty, so I got a glass of water. Yeah, notice, acknowledge, and choose a response. I'm thirsty. I should get some water right now. Good sharing. Keep it coming, too. So let's talk about 2 different aspects of how mindfulness can help with a mentoring relationship. One is psychological safety, your willingness to share, even when it's not necessarily comfortable to do so, and communication. And understanding that communication is a pretty big territory on its own. So first, psychological safety. And this, again, a very broad territory, and it's its own hour-long presentation, if not its own retreat. What do we mean by psychological safety? And this comes from Dr. Amy Edmondson, and she is a researcher around this theme of psychological safety. Well, you can see the quote yourself there on top of the screen. There's a few different aspects to that, but basically it's, I can share. It might not be entirely comfortable. I might be very comfortable. I might be in a brave space inside of myself rather than a vulnerable space, but I can share and know that I will be listened to. And that's why we did a little bit of listening practice included with our check-in here too. That listening isn't just about sounds, it's about tuning into how are you doing? And that importance of psychological safety is pretty big. There's a book, Shoot for the Moon, and it was about the moon launch and so many things that went into it. And one of the stories that is shared by the author who interviewed the people around that project was a particular circumstance that stood out for me of 2 different project managers doing different things within the program to get to the moon and land on it. One of them reported that, oh, everything's fine, no problems here, when some adverse event to the project had occurred. And the other person, a younger project manager, said, no, that was a real problem. And this was because of something I did. Take responsibility for that. And we really need to pay attention to this because that is something that can impact people's lives going to the moon. That individual was promoted and the other person was let go because the lead of that project and that aspect to it understood that without that sense of psychological safety and people speaking up, if we don't speak up or we hide very real challenges that exist, we miss an opportunity to make a difference, to change course. And there's research around companies that have strong sense of psychological safety for their employees do better because they address things that need to be addressed. So psychological safety is also very important for mentoring relationships. If you have a mentee or perhaps you yourself have felt like you can't share with the person who is your mentor, that's going to influence not just the relationship, but based on that relationship, its strength, its weaknesses. There may be less positive outcomes for people in that whole process of mentoring. So, what are some outcomes when psychological safety is not met? And on top of this is a few different questions. Whoops. Few different questions about what is that like, what happens, and how you can gauge it. Questions you can ask around it, and what it enables when there is psychological safety. People asking for help, hard questions, more information, can own mistakes, and then we can correct them. That top one, give and receive feedback, really, really helps. That's fundamental to having a sense of psychological safety. Without that, that strength and vulnerability is lost. I want to introduce, this is one of my dogs. This is Sweetie, and yes, his tongue does hang out that way, and my wife holding him. What are some things that help you have good lines of communication? Again, I want to hear from you. This is an interactive session in chat. Just give a word or two. What are some things that help you have good lines of communication? Put that in chat when you get a chance, because I want to hear from you about what some of that is. And there are different levels of listening. Let's see some feedback coming in. Yeah, getting that feedback and being able to provide that feedback. Again, if I don't have a sense of psychological safety, I'm not going to say anything because I know no one's listening, or it's not going to go well for me. So why should I bother? So being able to give and receive feedback, it's an important part of that. Thank you for sharing. When the other person is genuinely happy to be listening. And that's such a critical, I love the way you phrase that, genuinely happy to listen. That authenticity, that's one of the capabilities that mindfulness can help with, letting go of getting in our own way and being more genuine, being truly present with what's going on, and perhaps getting some joy out of that, experiencing that too, because that can be part of listening. So research on different levels of listening, and some of this may be familiar to you, that there's increasing depth of connection with these. From not listening, this is the la la la, I cannot hear you, not listening at all, to a next step, fake listening, which is I'm pretending to listen, but I'm not really doing it. It's also known as listening to, let's see if I can see that here, listening to speak. I'm just waiting for the other person to be done so I can say what I want to say. And one of the shares coming in, when the other person, Jen, you're happy to be listening, we went through that, but also knowing when you won't be judged. And again, here, mindfulness, that non-judgmental, it is a practice to develop that capacity. Thank you for putting that in there. So next after fake listening is selective listening. I only hear what I want to hear that supports my view. And again, that's not just for people. We see that with animals. Some of you who may have pets, when you say the word treat and you say the word bath with the exact same tone, you will have very different responses to your pets. You know this for yourself. And if you have children, or remember being a kid, the selective hearing that occurs a lot there too. Now, next step and a deeper level of connection is attentive listening, where you're truly doing your best to hear the other. We're going to do an exercise later on in our third part about this. Biases might still be present, but we're aware that they're present and doing our best to overcome them and really focus on what the person is saying. Now, finally, in research is empathic listening, that there is an emotional investment in this as well. But I add one more level into this because I think that's not quite enough. There's one more layer to this, which is compassionate listening. And that is where there's not just I'm receiving the distress, perhaps, from the other person who is sharing, but there's also a willingness to engage. Compassion fatigue, that's not so much a thing. Empathy fatigue, that happens. Not so much compassion fatigue. And again, you know this for yourself. What's it feel like when you genuinely help someone? And that doesn't mean fixing. It can be just being a good listener. That is compassionate listening. And that is something that is nourishing for ourselves. In one of my mentoring sessions just yesterday, this came up, the difference between empathy and compassion. that empathy can be draining, can lead to burnout, but compassion is fulfilling, energizing, enriching. And that, in some ways, can be used to show us, am I being a compassionate listener or an empathic listener? So, some characteristics of good communication are in here again. You're going to get this as a PDF later, so this will be available to you. And they're more effective and less effective with each of these. Great communication. Great communication. That needs you to be really present. It was asked some years ago when I was being interviewed about what mindfulness means to me, and what came up was showing up with care. Showing up with care is what really mindfulness means to me, and that showing up, it's active. It's not a passive thing. It is very active. It's intentional about the present moment. And that word care, showing up with care, care as a heartfulness, a human being, care, friendliness, kindness kind of care, but also the care of delicacy and gentleness too. Okay, this is my other dog. This is Boba, and take a look at his expression here. I see this, and I know that's judgmental Boba at this particular moment. And there is also a different kind of expression that shows up, and this is what I would call curious Boba. And the reason I put this in here is that human beings are very good at reading expressions. You can see this in animals here. We also certainly do this with expressions in human beings, and our focus on the faces, on the tone, on what is shared in body language. There's so many different layers to communication that mindfulness helps us to be a bit more aware of. Okay, our third part here, and then we will be moving on to questions, is a few different tools for including mindfulness in your mentoring. The first is an exercise I use in some of my programs, my mindfulness programs, my burnout programs, is an exercise about communication that is very artificial. And understanding, we are setting up artificial conditions with this exercise. The first is pick who's going to be a speaker and who's going to be a listener. The speaker takes 3 minutes to talk about, in this case, I put in mentoring needs that could use some attention. And while they're doing that, the listener is just listening. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then the listener takes 2 minutes, and that's when the listener speaks, and they share what they received while the person who was the first speaker just listens to that. And then there's 1 minute again of the speaker sharing what was it like for them to hear back what was shared in that. So a 3-2-1, 3 minutes for speaker, 2 minutes for the original listener, and then 1 minute for the speaker. And during that, only one person is speaking at a time. A part of this exercise is noticing what is it like when we are listening, not to do the yeah, and nodding and oh, me too, and all of that. What is it like to let that go? It doesn't mean you have to be a statue and perfectly still, but it does mean pay attention to habits we may have around that distract from actually deeply listening. And at the end of that, you thank your partner, you switch roles, and you do it again. And we both had the opportunity in these artificial 3-2-1, those 6 minutes, speak openly about what that was like and what you noticed. Now for the speaker, notice what it's like to be willing to share, to be willing to perhaps be vulnerable in what you're saying. Listener, this could be challenging for a lot of us to really be good listeners and not do the nodding and the yeses and the oh me toos and all of that. What is it like to focus on that speaker with the same level of attention that you might develop in a mindfulness practice, that focus, that openness, and that deep listening? So again, you'll have this in the PDF, and this is something you can try out with your mentees about what their experiences are like. And it's not just mentoring needs. You could substitute different kinds of inquiry with this. Another exercise that I use is developing SMART goals or aspirations, if goals are a little bit heavy for you, is to ask the person to write a few sentences about something. In this case, I put in, what's it look like when your mentoring goals are met? This is an exercise I like doing early on in the mentoring relationship. Have them write a few sentences about what their goals are. And then you go through it. What is the cause, actions, partners, and impact? You circle the place or person, square around any of the actions, highlight whoever the partners are, and underlining what are the outcomes of that. And then that can be used to put together some specific things they're going to do, some action items and SMART goals. I will help whatever it is they're trying to get out of it by what are they going to do about it? Who's going to help support them in this above and beyond you as the mentor? And what are the outcomes of this? What do we want to have be the change, the delta in this experiment? And then also have an eye about how those goals that are established through this exercise, and you don't do this just once, repeat it every so often, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, because those boundaries, that structure, can really help support people in moving forward. Now, the last tool, and there's only one more slide after this, is an exercise, and this is Pebble Drop. And I do this in my mindfulness and my burnout courses, and you can do this in many different ways, but let's give it a try first so you get an idea of what Pebble Drop is. Let's take our meditation seats again, sitting up nice and tall and straight, holding ourselves upright, inviting a sense of alert curiosity and perhaps calm dignity and a little bit of wonder. What is it like to sit with a sense of calm dignity? How does that show up in the body? How does that show up in your mind? Again, you can have your eyes open or closed, whatever is right and most supportive for you in this moment. With the Pebble Drop, we are practicing, exercising, and exploring curiosity about a particular question. The question can be something like, what do I want to get out of mentoring? What do I want to get out of the mentoring experience as a mentor? Or something else? Why are you here is another one. So think of a gentle curiosity that you have about something in your mentoring experiences. And you ask that question silently to yourself, like tossing a pebble onto the surface of a still pond, and you notice ripples come back. It's not a question that has to be answered. It's about noticing what might ripple back as we explore whatever your question, your pebble question happens to be. So trying that now, what is your question as you explore the surface of that? What's rippling back for you? And then as that pebble dips beneath the surface, goes a little deeper, asking again that same question, that same gentle curiosity, going a little deeper. No, really. Why mentoring? What about it? Whatever your question happens to be. And notice what comes back. This pebble continues on all the way to the bottom, so a third time as deeply as you can go. Really, really. What about mentoring? Whatever your question happens to be, as deeply as you can go, really, really, what comes back for you? Notice and acknowledge. Make some mental notes. We'll come back to this in a bit, because I'd like to hear from you about it. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes if you've had them closed, and maybe another little stretch. It might be kind of nice to feel. And this pebble drop, I usually take a bit longer with this, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and allow each moment, each different level, the surface, beneath the surface, and as deeply as you can go, to be its own practice. And take some time. Take some time formulating what you're curious about. What is your question? And always knowing that there is a gentleness with checking in and with pebble drop as a practice. So some takeaways for you on this is that mindfulness is like exercise. It's an ongoing development. You can increase or decrease your capacities in different aspects of your mentoring relationships. It takes some training, some intentionality, and having a clear understanding of those that we work with as mentees. Practices that we've shared today can certainly help with that, and understanding that we need to create the space where people can be vulnerable and still share. That psychological safety is a key part of that. And again, that showing up with care is part of all of this. So I am going to pause for questions here in a moment, and thank you for listening to all of this. But I also want to share that when you get the PDF for this, there's an appendix. There's some extra stuff in here describing a difference between psychological safety and trust. They're not the same thing. There's a relationship there, but they're not the same thing. And just a few other notes about effective and maybe less effective communication. So that will also be part of that. And with that, I will stop the share. And I'd like to open it up to anyone who may have some questions or insights from your own experience with mentoring. And my own curiosity, how did this land for you? And how are you doing right now? So if you'd like to take yourself off mute or put something in the Q&A that is active for this, or just in chat, this is the time for you to share and ask anything you'd like to. And again, thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ted, for such a powerful presentation. We would like to invite everybody to join us in the Q&A if you have any questions, anything that has resonated throughout the presentation, probably something that you would like to deep dive into, questions or reflections throughout this presentation. Please, we'd love to hear from you. I think they're still reflecting, Ted.
Everyone understood everything perfectly. Maybe something I could ask of people is if any of you have tried meditation in the past. Maybe just put in chat a yes or a no on any of that. Is that something you've had a little bit of experience with? I know there are a lot of different ways to engage with mindfulness and a meditation practice. They're not exactly the same thing. There's some overlap there. And what I've found is these days, there's a tendency to view formal meditation as a recording to listen to. And I will say that in my start with meditation and in my practice today, I don't listen to recordings. I do that in silence. I have a particular practice I may be doing. There are lots of different kinds of meditations, but I do those without listening to guidance and just really tuning into my own engagement with that particular practice, whether it's a focused attention practice, home base practice, as I call it, or whether it's an open awareness practice or a mindful movement. You don't need to be still. There are practices that involve paying attention to our experience while moving. So that's there too. All right. Well, if people would like to contact me later on, that's fine. I see a message came in, and we'll say a little bit more about this coming up. Yes, I've tried meditation, but not always been successful at it. Yeah, part of that is, what do we mean by success? What is our objective with it? Sometimes it's, "Oh, I'm going to sit for a minute and then I'll be perfectly calm and collected and everything will be great." Not necessarily so. Sometimes we're doing a practice and our mind is all over the place. And paying attention to how we are in each moment can help us determine what might be the most helpful practice for us to do right now. And it's not always the practice we like best. It may be one we don't like so much, but it's very helpful. Again, like going to the gym and physical exercise, I don't always want to do planks, but planks are really, really helpful, so I do them anyway. And one of the questions comes up a lot, thank you for putting this in, how to stay still in mind when it keeps running. So I presume this is around thoughts coming and going constantly. One of the interesting things is that we're not necessarily trying to stop thinking. Uh, Author in Mindfulness, one of the teachers, Jason Siff, has an entire book on thoughts are not the enemy. That we can change our experience of thinking. That is, in fact, a practice that I guide in one of my courses, Experiencing Thinking, so that having thoughts coming and going isn't wrong. That's part of our experience, just like hearing sounds is part of our experience. It's more about maybe what's helpful is changing our relationship to the thoughts. That they're not calling the shots, they are not leading us, but rather they're just part of the environment we're in this particular moment. And they don't need to be things that toss us around. Remember that first, one of the early slides in this presentation, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. That's the kind of thing John was referring to, is thoughts are going to happen. That's part of having a human brain. It's changing our relationship to them so that they're not running the show. Could you please shed some light on the relationship between mindfulness and self-awareness? Sure, glad to, because that's a very big topic. Again, a practice, not a perfect. With mindfulness, and mindfulness again means many things to many people. So broadly speaking, mindfulness is something that can help foster our sense of self-awareness, growing a bit more our capacity to not just experience what's here in this moment in a non-judgmental way with curiosity and receiving what's here, but also to learn more about ourselves, how we respond to what is showing up in our environment. Mindfulness isn't just bare attention. I can perfectly experience my breath in this moment and I really feel it, and thoughts aren't running the show. I'm just feeling the breath. It's also, how am I influenced by what's going on around me and within me? And self-awareness is a dynamic awareness. It's not just, I've now understood self and I can stop. Like, no, it's what is that self like in this moment? How is that shifting? Is it being tossed around by thoughts and emotions or sensations? Chronic pain, for example, can have a strong influence on how each of us is in each moment. But what is that changing like? What are the things that help shift us to having some, well, sense of calm if we're interested in that because we don't have it right now, or resiliency, or joy, or how do we deal with sadness or an anxiety or other things that happen in daily life? I hope that helps a little bit with that question, which is a really, really good one. And thank you coming in. You're very, very welcome. Thank you for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ted, for those insights. Really powerful presentation. And thank you so much, everybody, for the questions. It's not just, we learn from each other, our experiences and our stories. And it's always really good to, connect with each other, like-minded people. So that wraps our session for the Q&A. I appreciate everyone's participation and your thoughtful questions. Special thanks to you, Ted, for sharing your invaluable insights and expertise, which obviously brought unique perspective that truly resonates with our audience, and your passion was both inspiring and motivating. Is there
Thanks so much.
anything you would like to, as a closing?
Well, mainly just thanking everyone for your active engagement, your showing up with care during this time, and thanks for, well, all of the work from this institution for allowing this opportunity to share that there's a bit more that mindfulness can do in helping with mentoring relationships. And Ira, again, thank you so much for all of your support during this time and putting this together, and appreciate everyone's attention and your participation in it. Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And if you are a mentor seeking credentials, this is for our participants. If you're a mentor seeking credentials, or if you are a training provider yourself, the links are up on the chat. Please feel free to visit our website to know more. And if you are looking for a mentor such as Ted, you are welcome to connect with him through LinkedIn. His LinkedIn profile is shared on the chat, and you can also learn more about his courses, his workshop, and his amazing podcast that you guys have to listen to. It's on his website. You can also look into that and learn more about Ted and reach out to him if you'd like to connect with him more. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you found the session inspiring and fuels your commitment to fostering meaningful mentorships. Join us next week for another episode where we continue to learn, explore, connect, and empower each other. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate your presence today. Thank you so much, Ted.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.